The cold night air bit at Ethan's skin as he stumbled onto the deserted road. His vision blurred, his mind clouded with alcohol. He barely registered the blaring siren until a pair of firm hands caught him, steadying his swaying body. "Sir, you're not safe here." Ethan blinked up at the man holding him. A police officer, his sharp uniform crisp against the night. But Ethan wasn't thinking about the law, his safety, or even the consequences. He was thinking about how damn good those hands felt on him. And before he could stop himself, before reason could sink in, he pulled the officer closer and pressed his lips against his. That was the moment Officer Davis's world turned upside down. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and red as Ethan stumbled down the dimly lit street, his mind fogged by the overwhelming buzz of alcohol. The night air was thick with the scent of rain, the pavement still damp from an earlier downpour. He barely registered the honking cars swerving to avoid him as he staggered forward. His expensive suit disheveled, his tie hanging loosely around his neck. He had drowned his sorrows in whiskey, hoping to silence the weight of his failures. The endless stress at work, the suffocating loneliness that greeted him at home. But now, standing in the middle of an empty road, he realized he had lost track of time, of direction, of everything. The sudden flash of blue and red lights painted the dark street as the sharp wail of a police siren cut through the silence. A patrol car pulled up beside him, and the driver's side window rolled down. "Hey sir, are you okay?" a firm voice called out. Ethan turned, his vision spinning. A tall, broad-shouldered officer in uniform stepped out of the vehicle, his posture exuding authority. His sharp blue eyes studied Ethan with concern, his chiseled jaw tensed in focus. Officer Ben Davis had seen his fair share of drunk people roaming the streets. But something about this man struck him differently. Maybe it was the way his dark brown hair was messily tousled, or the way his lips curled into a lazy smirk despite his unsteady stance. Ethan squinted at him and chuckled, swaying slightly. "Officer, I think the ground is moving," he slurred. Ben exhaled, shaking his head. "You're wasted. Where do you live?" Ethan made a vague gesture towards the sky. "Somewhere over there, I think." Ben sighed. "All right, let's get you off the road before you get yourself killed." He reached out to steady Ethan, but the moment his hands gripped his arms, Ethan leaned into him. "You smell nice," he muttered against Ben's shoulder. Ben stiffened, his pulse skipping a beat. "Jesus," he muttered under his breath. "Come on, man, let's get you in the car." With some effort, he guided Ethan toward the police car, opening the passenger side door. Ethan, instead of cooperating, clung to Ben's uniform like a child. "You're strong," Ethan murmured, resting his head against Ben's chest for a moment. Ben swallowed, trying to ignore the heat creeping up his neck. "Yeah, well, I work out. Now get in the damn car." Ethan reluctantly let go and slumped into the seat, his head falling back against the headrest. As Ben shut the door and walked around to the driver's side, he let out a breath, shaking his head. As Ben started the engine, Ethan shifted in his seat, his drowsy eyes flickering open. "Officer, what's your name?" "Ben." Nice name." Ben ignored him, focusing on the road. The last thing he needed was to entertain a drunk man's babbling. But suddenly he felt fingers tracing along his arm. "Hey," Ethan whispered, his voice low and husky. "You're really handsome." Ben tensed. "Ethan, sit back and keep your hands to yourself." But Ethan didn't listen. Instead, he leaned in too close. Before Ben could react, Ethan grabbed his collar and pulled him into a kiss. Ben's entire body froze. His brain screamed at him to push Ethan away, to stop this, but the warmth of those lips sent a shockwave down his spine. "Ethan," he growled, breaking the kiss, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. "You're drunk. You don't know what you're doing." Ethan chuckled, his fingers still trailing over Ben's uniform. "I know exactly what I'm doing," he whispered, his breath warm against Ben's skin. Ben clenched his jaw, trying to suppress the emotions clawing at his chest. He had spent years hiding his desires, maintaining his composure, keeping his personal life separate from his job. But Ethan, this drunk, reckless stranger, was testing every ounce of control he had. He had to stop this. He had to resist. But Ethan's lips found his neck. And for the first time in years, Ben's resolve wavered. The city streets were silent, save for the rhythmic patter of rain against the windshield. Inside the police car, The tension was suffocating. Ethan, still intoxicated, let out a slow, drunken chuckle, his fingers grazing Ben's arm again. "You're fighting it," he murmured, his voice thick with desire. "I can feel it." Ben gripped the steering wheel, knuckles turning white. "Ethan, stop." But Ethan didn't. His lips, warm and teasing, trailed along Ben's jaw, his breath hot against his skin. Every nerve in Ben's body was on fire, his control slipping like sand through his fingers. He had spent years burying this part of himself, denying it, suppressing it under the weight of his badge. Ethan, in his drunken haze, was pulling all of it to the surface. With a groan of frustration and longing, Ben finally snapped. He turned sharply, capturing Ethan's lips in a deep, desperate kiss. The car was plunged into heat and chaos as their mouths met. All restraint crumbling, Ethan moaned into the kiss, his fingers clutching Ben's uniform, pulling him closer. Ben pushed back his seat, his hands sliding around Ethan's waist, guiding him into his lap. Their bodies pressed together, lips moving feverishly, tasting, exploring, devouring. The rain pounded harder against the car roof, creating a rhythm that matched their heavy breathing. Ethan's jacket slipped from his shoulders, and Ben's hands roamed, tracing the curves of his body. The scent of alcohol mixed with Ethan's natural musk, an intoxicating blend that sent Ben spiraling deeper into his desires. The world outside disappeared. It was just them, lost in each other. Time became a blur. Hands tangled in hair, whispered names filled the air, and bodies molded together in the dim glow of the streetlights. It wasn't just lust, it was something more, something unspoken and undeniable. And then, as the storm outside raged on, Ethan's exhaustion took over. His head rested against Ben's chest, his breathing slowing, softening. Ben exhaled, his own heart still racing, his hands still trembling as Ethan drifted into sleep. Ben held him close, the reality of what had just happened settling in. Ethan woke up to the unfamiliar scent of clean linen and the distant hum of a city waking up. His head pounded, a dull ache pulsing behind his eyes. Where the hell was he? He sat up abruptly, his body protesting as memories flickered through his mind in fragments, flashes of blue and red lights. The warmth of strong arms around him, a feverish kiss in the backseat of a car. A low, steady voice interrupted his panic. "Morning." Ethan turned sharply to see Ben standing by the bedroom doorway, dressed in casual sweatpants and a fitted t-shirt that did nothing to hide the definition of his chest. His piercing blue eyes held a mixture of uncertainty and something deeper. Something unreadable. Ethan swallowed hard. What happened?" Ben hesitated before stepping forward. "You were drunk. I couldn't take you home in that state, so I brought you here to sleep it off." Ethan blinked. "And the other stuff?" Silence. Ben's jaw tensed. "You kissed me first." Ethan's heart pounded as more memories resurfaced. He had kissed Ben. He had wanted him, and Ben had wanted him back. But now, in the clarity of morning, panic set in. I don't do this," Ethan stammered, shaking his head. "I was drunk. This was a mistake." Ben's expression darkened, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "A mistake," he echoed, his voice eerily calm. Ethan scrambled out of bed, reaching for his shirt. "I had to go." Ben watched as he hurriedly dressed, his movements frantic, his breathing uneven. "Ethan, stop." But he didn't. He couldn't. He had spent his entire life building walls, constructing a version of himself that was safe, acceptable. Last night had cracked those walls, and that terrified him. I'm sorry," Ethan whispered before bolting for the door. Ben didn't stop him. He just stood there, his heart sinking as the door slammed shut. Ethan spent the entire day lost in his thoughts. He should feel regret. He should feel disgusted with himself. But he didn't. Instead, he kept replaying the way Ben had kissed him, the way his hands had roamed, the way his voice had turned husky with need. It had felt good, too good. And that was the problem. At work, Ethan was distracted, barely hearing anything his business partners were saying. His assistant had to call his name 3 times before he even realized she was talking to him. Meanwhile, Ben wasn't faring any better. Seated in his patrol car, he stared at his phone. Ethan's contact information pulled up on the screen. He had taken it from the ID in his wallet the night before, an excuse to make sure he got home safe. Now, he wasn't sure what to do with it. He had never felt like this before. And deep down, He knew Ethan had felt it too, even if he wasn't ready to admit it yet. It had been days since that night, yet Ethan couldn't shake the memories. No matter how much he buried himself in work, he kept replaying the heat of Ben's touch. The way their lips had fit together so perfectly. And the way he had run. He hated himself for it. With a sigh, he pushed through the doors of his favorite cafe, desperate for caffeine to power through his morning meetings. The moment he stepped in, his heart stopped. Ben was there, dressed in his police uniform, looking every bit as strong and composed as Ethan remembered. He was standing near the counter, waiting for his order, completely unaware of Ethan's presence. Until their eyes met, a jolt of something intense passed between them. Ethan swallowed hard, suddenly debating whether he should just walk out. But it was too late. Ben's gaze had locked onto his, and there was no turning back. Ethan cleared his throat, forcing himself to act normal as he stepped forward. "Hey." Ben raised an eyebrow but said nothing at first. Then, in a low, firm voice, he muttered, "You should stop drinking like that. Next time, you won't be so lucky." Ethan stiffened. It wasn't anger in Ben's tone. It was something else, concern. He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, I know." Ben studied him for a moment before nodding. "Good." Just then, the barista called Ben's name, handing him his coffee. Without another word, Ben turned and walked out. Ethan stood there, his chest tightening. It wasn't enough. He wasn't ready to let go of whatever this was. Before he could stop himself, he rushed outside. "Ben, wait." Ben paused, turning slightly. Ethan hesitated. He wasn't good at this. Being vulnerable, admitting his faults. But something about Ben made him want to try. "Would you? I mean, do you think you could help me?" Ethan asked, his voice uncertain. Ben narrowed his eyes. "Help you with what?" Ethan took a deep breath. "With the drinking. I know I need to stop. But I don't know how." For a long moment, Ben just looked at him, his expression unreadable. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded. "Okay," Ben said, "but if we do this, you have to take it seriously." Ethan nodded. "I will." Ben held out his coffee. "Then we start now. No more running away." Ethan took the cup from him, fingers brushing briefly, sending an unexpected spark up his arm. This time, he didn't run. What started as a simple offer of help soon became something more. Ben had Ethan up at 6 o'clock in the morning for runs. At first, Ethan hated it. He was a businessman, not an athlete, but Ben didn't go easy on him, pushing him to move, to breathe, to let go of the stress that had weighed him down for so long. "You rely on alcohol to escape," Ben told him one morning as they jogged side by side. "But there are better ways." Ethan scoffed, wiping sweat from his brow. "Yeah, like torture workouts." Ben smirked. "Like taking control." They started meeting outside of workouts. 2. Casual walks in the park. Quiet late-night talks over coffee. Ethan found himself opening up in ways he never had before. "I drink because it's the only thing that makes the stress go away," Ethan admitted one evening, staring into the distance. "My job, the pressure, the expectations, it's too much sometimes." Ben listened, his gaze steady. "I get it." Ethan gave a bitter laugh. "Do you? You seem like you have everything together." Ben was quiet for a moment before he spoke. "I used to think that too. Until I met you." Ethan's breath caught. Something had changed between them. It was no longer just about drinking. It was about them, and Ethan wasn't sure he could fight it anymore. The night was calm, the river reflecting the moonlight like scattered diamonds. The gentle sound of water lapping against the shore filled the silence between them as Ethan and Ben sat side by side on the grass. It had become a routine, meeting after dark, talking about everything and nothing. But tonight felt different. Ethan took a deep breath, gripping a small stone in his hand. He had been battling with his emotions for weeks now. But the moment had come. He couldn't ignore it anymore. "I was scared," he finally admitted, his voice quiet but steady. "That morning, when I woke up at your place, I panicked. But I haven't stopped thinking about you." Ben turned to him, his blue eyes searching Ethan's face for something. Hesitation, doubt, regret. But he found none. "You don't have to be scared," Ben murmured. Ethan let out a breathless chuckle. "That's easy for you to say." Ben looked away for a moment, as if debating something before he spoke. "You think this has been easy for me?" Ethan frowned. "Hasn't it?" Ben scoffed, shaking his head. "I've spent my whole life hiding how I feel. My job, my family, I couldn't let anyone see that side of me. And then you came along. And suddenly, I didn't want to hide anymore. Ethan's chest tightened. He reached out, hesitating for a second before placing his hand over Ben's. Ben looked down at their joined hands, his breath hitching. For the first time, Ethan didn't feel confused. He didn't feel lost. He just felt right. Slowly, he leaned in. This time, their kiss wasn't rushed. It wasn't fueled by alcohol or reckless desire. It was real. Ben's lips moved against his with gentle certainty, his hand coming up to cradle the back of Ethan's neck. It was a kiss filled with unspoken promises, with the weight of emotions they had both been too afraid to acknowledge. When they pulled apart, Ben rested his forehead against Ethan's. "What now?" he whispered. Ethan exhaled. "I don't know, but I want to find out." The days that followed were filled with cautious steps and quiet realizations. Ethan struggled to understand himself. Was he gay? Bisexual? Had he always been? Did it even matter? "I don't know how to define this," he admitted one evening as they lay on Ben's couch, his head resting against Ben's shoulder. Ben ran a soothing hand up and down Ethan's arm. "You don't have to." Ethan tilted his head up to look at him. "But don't you want to know?" Ben smiled softly. "All I care about is that you're here." And somehow, that was enough. Their bond deepened with each passing day. Ethan learned about Ben's love for old classic cars, his dream of traveling to Europe one day. Ben learned about Ethan's childhood, his complicated relationship with his father, his desire to build something meaningful in his life. There were challenges, of course. Ethan still battled the urge to drink when things got tough. Ben had his own fears about what being in a relationship with another man would mean for his career. But through it all, they had each other. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. Ethan had never been good at hiding things. His friends, especially his best friend, Jake, were quick to pick up on changes in his behavior. "You seem different," Jake said one night as they sat at their usual bar. Ethan, however, had only ordered a soda. "You've stopped drinking. You smile more. And dare I say, you look like a man in love." Ethan nearly choked on his drink. "What? No. Jake raised an eyebrow. "Come on, man, you think I don't know you? Who is she?" Ethan froze. He had been dreading this moment. The truth was, he wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. Not because he was ashamed, but because it still felt new, uncertain. Ben had been patient, never pressuring him, but Ethan knew there was only so much time before it would start to hurt. Later that night, as they lay in Ben's bed, Ben finally asked, "Are you ever going to tell them?" Ethan sighed. "It's not that I don't want to. I don't know how." Ben turned to face him, his expression serious. "I get it, but I don't want to be a secret forever." Ethan swallowed hard. He knew he had to make a choice. The next weekend, Ethan invited Jake and a few of his friends out for dinner. He was nervous, his hands clammy as he sat beside Ben, who was calm and composed as always. Halfway through the night, Ethan took a deep breath and said, "There's something I need to tell you guys." The table fell silent. All eyes were on him. Ethan's heart pounded, but he reached for Ben's hand under the table, gripping it tightly. "Ben's not just a friend. We're together." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, Jake smirked. "Damn, finally." Ethan blinked. "Wait, what? Another friend?" Lisa rolled her eyes. "Come on, Nick. We've all suspected something was up. We were just waiting for you to say it." A breath of relief escaped Ethan's lips as laughter and cheers erupted around the table. Ben squeezed his hand, and when Ethan turned to look at him, he saw pride in his eyes. Later that night, as they walked through the city, Ben suddenly stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. "What?" Ethan asked, confused. Ben smirked. "I think it's time for this." Before Ethan could ask what he meant, Ben leaned in and kissed him. Right there in public, for anyone to see. Ethan felt his heart race. Not from fear, but from the exhilarating feeling of finally being free. As the city lights glowed around them, Ethan knew this was only the beginning. Ethan never imagined that a single night of drunken recklessness could lead to something so profound. But here he was, standing in the kitchen of their shared apartment, pouring himself a cup of coffee while Ben stood beside him, flipping pancakes. It had been a year since that fateful night, and Ethan had changed in more ways than he thought possible. He no longer drank himself into oblivion after a stressful day. He didn't need to. Ben had helped him find better ways to cope. From evening runs to late-night conversations on the balcony. You still suck at making coffee, Ben teased, taking a sip from Ethan's cup and grimacing. Ethan rolled his eyes, playfully nudging him. And you still burn half the pancakes. Ben smirked. I only burn them when you distract me. Ethan leaned against the counter, watching Ben with a soft smile. This was home. Moving in together had been a big step. One Ethan hadn't been sure he was ready for at first. But Ben had been patient, letting things unfold naturally. One evening after a long day at work, Ethan had walked into Ben's apartment, kicked off his shoes, and flopped onto the couch like he always did. Ben had stood in the doorway, watching him with an amused expression. You know, Ben had said, crossing his arms, you spend more nights here than at your own place. Ethan had groaned, because your bed is more comfortable. Ben had smirked, so why not make it officially yours? Ethan had sat up, blinking. Are you asking me to move in? Ben had shrugged, feigning nonchalance. Unless you like paying rent for a place you barely stay at. Ethan had tried to act casual, but his heart had been pounding. He had known then and there that he wanted this, that he wanted Ben. And now, months later, he couldn't imagine life any other way. There were challenges, of course. Ethan still had moments of doubt, still had days where he struggled with fully accepting the changes in his life. But Ben was always there, steady and unwavering. You don't have to figure everything out at once. Ben had told him one night as they lay in bed. Just know that I'm here. Ethan had rolled over, pressing a kiss to Ben's shoulder. I know. And he did. As Ben set down 2 plates of slightly overcooked pancakes, Ethan chuckled and grabbed a fork. Here's to one drunken night leading to something real, Ethan said, raising his coffee mug like a toast. Ben grinned, clinking his own mug against it. And to many more sober nights together. Ethan smiled, taking Ben's hand in his. Yes, this was real. This was love. And it was only the beginning.